And we just heard there from the ministers from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, some great projects in place, some great plans in place. And again, some tremendous focus in terms of what has to be done, what's being done now and what has to be done in the future. And we heard there from His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz as well, talking very much about the transition and how this is something that around the world we must all take responsibility for. And we must also look at this as a transition. It's not about just getting to zero, so to speak. There's so much to be done on that journey, and right now a lot of attention needs to be paid there. So what is it all going to cost? Who's going to invest? What will be the big benefits? So much to go on as we head to that net zero transition. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome live from McKinsey & Company, senior partner, Harry Bowcott is with us. Harry, lovely to see you, and I'm so happy that you've joined us. I'm really looking forward to what you have to tell us when we're looking at, where's the money going to come from and what's it all about?
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Over the weekend, I was reading Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland to my children. Not only does it remain an excellent read, one I can strongly recommend, but also it triggered a thought in me about the finance needed to enable the transition to a net zero economy. Bear with me. At the beginning of the book, Alice falls down a rabbit hole and finds herself trapped in a small room. She can see the only way out, and she can see that the destination looks appealing, but she doesn't know how to get there. She's both too big for the door and too small to get the key. And to add to the drama, every now and then a rabbit appears, getting increasingly stressed about how late everything is. While I should perhaps have been paying more attention to my children, this made me think about how I feel about climate finance and the transition that you mentioned. We know that a net zero economy is the only way out of where we are. We know that it's getting increasingly late and that there is an urgency to act. But it seems to me that the capital we have to fund the transition is, like Alice, simultaneously too big and too small. So this afternoon, I'd like to talk briefly about this paradox and two things it implies that governments and companies should do to enable an orderly transition to a net zero economy. So what is this paradox? Well, today, as companies and countries look to make credible progress on their commitments, we have more capital looking for a home that we can fulfill with investable projects or green materials and products. Our capital is too big. For companies, this means there is a need to create strategic resilience in an era of certain volatility. Looking forward, though, we're a long way, perhaps as much as $3.5 trillion a year off the amount of capital that we need to fund an orderly transition to net zero. Our capital is too small. And to make a start on solving this issue, governments and business need to align around a common framework that lays out where we need more capital, how we generate it, how we get it to the right places, and do both in a way that softens the regressive impact implicit in an unmanaged or disorderly transition.
Thank you.
So it's no great insight to say that the transition to a net zero economy will be complicated, messy, and hard. In our article, Solving the Net Zero Equation, published just before COP26, we summarised our year-long research programme to go beyond the platitude and lay out the 9 elements that need to play in concert, if not in unison, to navigate the transition in an orderly way. We described 3 sections of the orchestra, each with 3 distinct instruments in them. First, the physical building blocks, the technology innovation, the scaling of supply chains, and the access to the raw materials necessary. Second, the economic and societal adjustments, encompassing effective capital allocation, the management of demand shifts, and the compensating mechanisms necessary to address the regressive nature of the costs of carbon. And third, the commitment in enabling mechanisms. So the governance, the institutions, the tracking and market mechanisms that we will need, the public and private sector leadership, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, the popular consent that will be needed for this journey. This is the ensemble orchestra that needs conducting. And like any good symphony, the interdependence between these instruments is fiendishly hard to unravel. However, in our 2020 report that laid out how the EU could get to net zero at net zero cost, we showed that more than 80% of the emissions reduction that was required could be delivered through technologies that already exist today, perhaps though not at scale. This percentage varies country by country around the world. But in each of the 40 or so decarbonisation pathways that we have done in recent years, it gives us cause for relative optimism that we will be able to solve the issues in bucket one, the physical building blocks. The bigger challenge is how to navigate the economic and societal adjustments with the right governance, institutions and commitment. And the toughest part of that, arguably, is how the global economy generates sufficient capital and allocates it to where it's needed while maintaining popular consent globally. The mobilization of capital was one of the most visible successes of COP26. Much of the commentary about COP26 has focused on the things it didn't achieve. We think COP26 was an important step forward, not because of the temperature trajectory implied by the commitments made, but because the demand signal for the transition has now been set unequivocally. The debate is no longer whether, but how. It's because the debate has moved on and because tangible progress is now expected at a country and company level that net zero is now an organising principle for government and business around the world. The credibility of an institution's delivery on a clear plan is already driving differentials in valuations and access to cheap capital. The clarity of this shift is why we believe that companies now need to prioritise building strategic resilience in an era of certain volatility. In summary, that volatility will come because of imbalances in demand and supply, amplified by geopolitics and the effects of climate hazard, and because we can have lower confidence in our ability to forecast and prevent economic shocks. And I'll just pick into a few of those assertions in a little more detail. With the huge range of national and corporate commitments to net zero summed up in COP26, coupled with the mobilisation of the GFANZ trillions, there's now a lot of capital and a lot of institutions looking to make credible progress. That acceleration of demand will outstrip our ability to supply the raw materials necessary. That's what I meant by the available capital being too big. Amplifying the inflationary impact of lots of capital chasing relatively few scarce opportunities for investment is geopolitics. This isn't the place, and I'm not the person to explore geopolitics, but we do live in a fractious world at just the time when we need more solidarity than ever. And some of the flashpoints in that world overlap unhelpfully with some of the most severe exposure to climate hazard. And climate hazard will drive migration, which will exacerbate the strain on governments, populations, and the supply chains that pass through those regions. And the historic precedents that we've used to forecast demand and economic conditions will no longer hold in quite the same way. For example, our work with the UN Race to Resilience last year showed that in a 2-degree world, approximately 400 million people in India will find it too hot to work outside 25% of the time. Now, aside from the impact that that has on 400 million lives and livelihoods, not many corporate economic models factor in a climate hazard impact on GDP at all, let alone at that scale. So you put all of these things together, and the environment is certainly to be volatile, with price spikes on raw materials, finished goods, and supply discontinuities. And perhaps we can see a microcosm of this today with gas prices in Europe. So to thrive in this era of certain volatility suggests to us 4 priorities for companies around the world. First, as you turn your net zero pledges into concrete plans, ensure you develop a compelling North Star for your organization that can sustain investor and colleague confidence in the medium term by helping you ride through the bumps in the road in the short term. Change narratives have always been critical to transformations in any organization. We think it's ever more important in a world of volatility. Second, we think
to change the narrative in so many ways and to quickly change it. We've had so many great speakers today. We have so many more to come, so we're going to have to wrap it up there. But I really, really want to thank you for taking the time, Harry. I'm looking forward to having a read of all of your reports, and I love the way you're talking about there conducting that orchestra, because there are so many players involved when it comes to actually, making sure that we're heading to net zero. And again, we'll always be looking out for the great work you're doing at McKinsey. Harry, thank you so much. Harry Bowcott, thank you.